and welcome to Exchanges for another week. I haven't been this excited by an interview for a long, long time, and that's nothing against all the guests that I've had before because you've been amazing, but this is an interview about what got me into behavioral economics, what got me into economics as a whole, and it's around the founding father of, or at least the founding creator of economics and behavioral economics in Adam Smith. If you haven't seen or heard of Wealth of Nations, please do yourself a favor and go and have a read. It is the basis that a lot of people use for the whole concept of economics and to some extent capitalism, but capitalism in a good way. And it's not just that, it's then also who is here to discuss it. Joesph Healy, founder of Judo Bank, associate professor at multiple universities, holds PhDs in economics, but also in physiology and behavior. He is an incredible thinker, and we here in Australia are lucky to have someone of his ilk actually talking about this subject. Because what we're talking about today is that he's written a new book, which is called Adam Smith's Take on Modern Australia. This is one of the best exchanges I've had because the concepts that we get to bring, the thought process that Joesph brings in is absolutely phenomenal. And it is my pleasure to now bring you Joesph Healy discussing the future of Australia through the eyes and the lens of Adam Smith. Joesph Healy, welcome to Exchanges. When I saw this book that you'd written by a publisher that you and I share conjointly around what would Adam Smith make of modern Australia, for me personally, it was an absolute fascination because he is seen as the founder of not just modern economics, modern behavioral economics and psychology, but also, Wealth of Nations is sort of, as it says in the headlines, right? It is the basis for what a lot of people have built their empires on, including, Margaret Thatcher and all from the left. What started this? Because this is quite a book topic, and how you've come to this is absolutely staggering. First and foremost, also, congratulations, amazing. But take me through what brought this on and why you ended up doing this book.
Oh, thank you, Evan. Thank you for inviting me on. Well, I've had for quite a long time, decades, a real interest, actually going right back to high school, a deep interest in Adam Smith and his contribution to the world, and not just in terms of economics. Because actually, Adam Smith wasn't an economist; he was a moral philosopher.
Yeah.
The economics as the subject in science that we know today wasn't around when Smith was alive, but his writings have influenced the way economics has evolved. And 99% of people you speak to who know anything about economics say Adam Smith was the founding father of economics or the founding father of capitalism. So I had a long interest in Smith, and I consider him to be one of the great intellectuals that has shaped the world that we live in today. But I became concerned a number of years ago by a couple of trends that I had observed here in Australia. I should say trends that are not unique to Australia, but my interest is what matters.
Is you sort of alluding to like the developed world? Is that where you sort of...
Let's call it the West or the rich world.
Yeah.
And the first one was a growing disconnect between measures of economic success and measures of societal health. And what had happened was those two important measures were becoming quite disconnected, and the gap was growing. And so we were seeing economic growth in terms of GDP and GDP per capita. We were seeing house prices continuing to grow, in a sense that we were living, as we are, in a wealthy country. But when you look closer at some of the trends in terms of society, they were quite concerning. And for example, I look at income and wealth inequality. That has never been as big a gap as today as it has been in the past. You think about crime rates, which are at record highs. You think about family dysfunctionality, be that divorce rates or domestic violence. You think about gambling, the problems that we have with gambling, drug and alcohol addiction, and the list goes on. And so you look at that and you say, well, these trends are not healthy, because Smith would argue that a prosperous economy has also has a prosperous society. They go hand in glove. But in fact, that's not what is happening here. And my concern was that if this trend, I kind of characterize it as a boiled frog syndrome, you know,
Yeah.
and if nothing is done, then this situation will deteriorate to a point where it becomes crisis. So I think the gap between the haves and the have-nots, uh, um, the inequalities that are now very evident in our society, was something that concerned me. And then the second thing that had been concerning me for quite some time, actually, was the way. And that I say this as someone who's passionate about the power of markets and the power of capitalism. But I had become really quite concerned about the conduct of capitalists within the capitalist system, and a strong feeling that capitalism was being ruined in the way that it had been hijacked, and had been allowed to operate. And again, going back to the disconnect between what is happening in the economy and what is happening in society. I mean, the reputation of business, for example, the business sector, uh, in the eyes of the community, has never been poorer. People don't trust big business. They daily, almost daily reports of abuse of customers, of charging excess fees. The Royal Commission that the banks went through not that many years ago. The saga that we unfolded last year with Qantas in terms of uh, charging people for flights that didn't exist and getting people getting money back. The price gouging that many commentators argue is evident in a number of sectors in our economy. And what I describe in the book, a cap a capital system that had been captured by economic rent-seeking actors. That's jargon, but basically, uh, when I say rent-seeking actors, I mean businesses that have primary purpose is to extract as much profit as they can from the system, excess levels of profit, because in any
Yeah.
competitive environment, businesses have to make profit in order to invest and survive. But when businesses are making excessive returns over their cost of capital, that's what economists call rents. Those rents shouldn't exist in competitive markets. But what has happened in Australia, in so many of our key sectors, in fact, I would argue almost all of our key
Most.
sectors, we have heavily concentration in a small number of powerful businesses that are able to extract levels of profitability that they would not be able to enjoy if markets were competitive. So let's take our two big food retailers as an example.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen many reports that say that uh, they are the most profitable food retailers in the world. Now, sometimes that would be seen as a badge of honor of great management, but actually, the flip side of that is, as consumers, we are getting a rough deal. We're getting charged more than we should be getting charged, because those two big retailers dominate almost two-thirds of the food retailing market. And in many places, they have, almost a duopoly. And the same is true in the banking system, where you've got four big banks that have 80% plus of the whole banking system. They are amongst the most profitable banks in the world. I mean, our largest bank, of course, is one of the most highly valued banks in the world. And part of that's a function of, well, a big part of it's because of the industry structure. There's weak competition, but also it's that consumers are not getting a good deal when they come to dealing with the banks. And I could go on and on and on. So when I look at capitalism, I see a system that is being badly damaged, argue ruined, by the conduct of capitalists.
Because one of the principles of Adam Smith was that he saw economics as being inseparable from morality and social context, right? And so what you've just talked about is that the rent, and yeah, that is the buzz term in economics. The rent profit means that the role of ethics and empathy is being missed in what he was talking about. How do we get back for that? Because the other thing you just alluded to is that Australia also has duopolies, monopolies, or oligopolies with regards to the banks, something you know incredibly well about having founded Judo Bank. How do we fix that? Because we have a demographic issue as well, in that we're a small populous nation, very, very vast area of land. Therefore, costs of movement, costs of transport gets distorted versus a European sort of area or a US area where they have a population that can actually sustain high levels of competition. How do we integrate Smith's concept of empathy and ethics into economics in a society that has a very vast populous land, but with a population that doesn't fill it?
Yeah, I'm not sure just on that last point that population size and geographical landmass is an adequate justification for the problem that I've been alluding to. It's
Yeah, fair enough.
often offered up as a, as an
As an
excuse,
excuse.
but I don't accept it. I would challenge it. I think going back to the kind of moral and ethical aspects of business, this is a big issue, and it's been a discussion in Australia and elsewhere for a number of years. That there's an ethics center, for example, that has tried to promote ethical conduct in business sectors. Banks, for example, and I think other players in the financial services sector, all signed up for a code of conduct or an oath to conduct their individuals, but also organizations to conduct themselves in line with ethical principles. But none of that has translated into practice. And the challenge is that we have a system, and again, I emphasize not unique to Australia. But the reason why I'm quite passionate about this topic in Australia is that when I look at the United States and I look at Britain, two markets that I know well, we're not as advanced in this crisis as they are, but we could sleepwalk in that direction if we don't do something about it. So that's one of the reasons why I think this is a topic or topics that should be discussed and debated. But and what can we do about it? I think the way that businesses are run, and in terms of uh, particularly public companies with the tech focus on short-term profit maximization, the pressure to meet the market, the way that incentives in terms of these senior executive remuneration is heavily linked. So it kind of reinforces behaviors that are all about short-term conduct, and it's all about how do we maximize profit. Now, the corporate governance environments, which I talk about in quite a bit of detail in the book, is also part of the problem, because corporate governance, which should really be a board of directors on behalf of shareholders and other stakeholders supervising the conduct and performance of management, that has become over time in overly compliance, overly legalistic and rules based uh, set of values. And I think that's at the cost of some of these moral and ethical and much broader principles about how businesses should be run. So
Hmm.
I talk, for example, about in the business world, we almost have this tension between the business and its consumers, despite the marketing rhetoric. We also have the tension between the business and its employees. The employees often feel quite disconnected from the companies that they work in. The propensity for big decisions to be made without much consultation, is just part of the whole problem. And I feel that we need to go back to fundamentals when we think about the purpose of business in society, keeping in mind that businesses must make a profit. So this is not about socializing business, but it's saying that
Can I just come to something then? Because what you've hit on there is something that I talk about quite a lot. And I want to get back to your point there about employment and about the identification inside employment, which is we're going through a huge discussion at the moment about productivity and about the economic roundtable that's coming up here in Australia, But what you're really alluding to is about productivity is about enhancement, right? So it's about using your time more wisely, investing in your people. What can I get your point then on this is that do you feel the reason that there is this disconnect in employment is that employees aren't seen as assets of the business, tangible assets of the business, and therefore, if you could value the output that your employees are giving, the productivity that it's increasing, and therefore the asset value that it creates inside your business, that that disconnect until we put that back together, the as you said, the societal part of it would link because all of a sudden employees would identify with the businesses they're working in. The productivity that they would create would be better, and the output economically would be higher. Is that sort of what you're also alluding to
Yeah,
here?
that's a good way to frame it. I mean, but the other lens that I use is part of my supporting information, if you will, for arguing that employees feel quite disconnected from their businesses, is the crisis that we have in mental health, and particularly workplace mental
Yeah.
health. I mean, the Productivity Commission estimated that costs the economy $220 billion per annum. That was a 4 years or 5 years ago that estimate was made. But we know from all of the indicators around mental health that quite a lot of it can be linked back to the workplace. And we are in a world today of dramatic, almost unprecedented change on so many fronts. You know, we can look at the geopolitical things that are going on. We can look at the role of technology and the future role of AI and how that will transform work. I mean, some estimates have said that 30% of jobs will change or will no longer exist. There's climate change. There's the mental health thing that I talked about. Uh, there's a societal disconnect to the economy that I talked about. So there's a long list of things that and there's house affordability. There's debt
Mm.
levels. We have one of the highest household debt levels in the developed world, and that creates huge burdens on people and their families and how they feel about life. So I think there's a lot going on, and I feel it's very important that as we navigate through all these changes, is that the voice of the employee is elevated in the way that businesses think and the way that businesses make decision, and they're not simply seen as a resource. Like, I hate the term human resource. It's
Mm.
such a deeply impersonal term. And when you get up in the morning, and particularly when you're thinking about committing the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years of your life to a particular career in a particular organization, you want to feel emotionally connected to that organization. You want to feel valued by that organization, and you want to feel that you have a voice in that organization. All of those things have been largely lost in a substantial way in the way that business is run. I believe in part that's because of the demise of trade unions. Now, again, I just want to put a qualifier here. I believe strongly in the importance of trade unions. But as I have been appalled by the way that capitalists have ruined capitalism, I have been appalled at the conduct of many trade unions and the way that they have so-called represented their members.
Members.
Yeah, which I think they fundamentally failed. So I'm talking about trade unions in an idealistic sense, and that they are there to represent their members in the affairs of the organization, not in a destructive manner, but in a constructive manner. And what's happened in Australia is that trade union membership, I think now, is about less than
Tribalism.
15%. It's less than 15%. In the
Yeah, it's
United
12.
It's 12.
It's
Yeah,
12%.
yeah. In the United States, it's about 10%. In Britain, it's slightly over 20. But the point is that there's no real voice of the worker in the affairs of the business, and trade unions should be providing that platform and acting sensibly, responsibly, and constructively. And individuals should feel part of that rather than feeling that they're isolated and that they're subject to some major change without any process of their being involved. And again, being treated like a cost base, or let's cut costs by 10%. How do we do that? Let's get rid of some people. That sort of capitalist mindset is not what Adam Smith ever talked about. That you get the
Yeah.
best out of people by caring about people, by looking after
So
people. And
because he used in theory of modern semantics, he wrote about self-interest, right? And
yes,
about temporary self-interest and compassion. Um, and that's sort of what you're alluding to there, is that we've lost that sort of that what he also referred to as the impartial scepter or
yes,
specter,
spectator.
of yeah, that's right. Of the internal moral judge versus the modern world. That clearly still applies today. I mean, we're talking about Adam Smith was around in the 18th century, so it's a long time ago. But you're right to point that out. And so the other thing that you're pointing out with trade unions and with business leaders is that their tribalism,
Yeah,
right? So you've now also created a scenario where the interest of the union doesn't always necessarily align with the interest of the employee either, because the interest of the union might actually be go after the business they work for rather than to actually promote the interest of the societal part of it. So the question then is, how do we bring that responsibility back? Where does that sit? Is it that we do need to get away from referring to, because I agree with you, human resources feels like a finite resource, right?
yeah,
Has a finite terminology. Is it just lexicon, or is it more around understanding that if we can incentivize, and using the great Charlie Munger's quote around, if show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome, that we can align workers, businesses, society, and economics, that we can then achieve what Smith was alluding to inside that impartial scepter.
yeah. I think that is exactly what needs to happen. I think one of the measures that I've focused in on in writing the book is just the decline in wages and salaries as a
Mm.
percentage of GDP, and just how the the value or the rewards have shifted aggressively, and this has been happening for quite some time, towards capital, away from labor, if I can use those factors of production terms. Uh, we should be looking at a world where people that are working in businesses are getting a fairer share and more reward for the success of the business, rather than the executives saying, "How do we manage, uh, you know, personnel costs in the P&L?" We should be saying, "Look, let's share the profits generated by the organization with the people that work in the organization before we pass dividends out to shareholders." There are examples of companies that have done that, and I'm sure there are in Australia, but I know that in the United Kingdom there was a big department store called John Lewis,
Yes.
which was a partnership in the sense that people felt that even if you were the most junior, retail staff member, that you felt you were part of the firm because you were eligible for a profit share at the end of the year. So you took an interest in how well the firm was doing.
I think the biggest story I know, like John Lewis in Australia, is Kennard's Hire.
Yes.
So Kennard's Hire has a very similar setup, and it's been very public that, when Kennard's did very, very well, I think it was 2016 or 17, that the spread of the profit share went from the very upper to the bottom with exactly the same profit share put out. And their retention of staff, their retention of overall, profitability went through the roof because everybody was working in the same direction, and which is what you're alluding to. Again, that gets back to the modern capitalist concept, which is that you're there to maximize shareholders'
Yeah.
reward, forgetting that, part of your shareholders should actually be your stakeholders, which are your employees as well.
100% agree. I think the maximizing shareholder value, which is a term that has been somewhat in the doghouse for quite a number of years.
Mm.
But I would say, and I argue in the book, that there's nothing wrong with shareholder value. But where it does go wrong is when it is seen as the sole purpose and objective of the organization. And in order to do that, businesses behave unethically,
Yep.
sometimes illegally, But we've seen loads of examples of that in the last year or two here, of businesses conducting themselves in a way, despite the volumes of paper in their annual report about all of the good things that they do and about their commitment to the environment and diversity and equity and inclusion and employee engagement, all of that stuff, and yet the conduct doesn't bear scrutiny, because it is the conduct and the reality is all about how do we maximize profit, and profit at all costs. Never said, of course, but that's what you observe. And I think, for example, about the conduct of one of the major accounting firms last year when it was accused of abusing privileged information from the Treasury about proposed changes in the tax laws. It used that information in order to increase its fee income from other clients who might have been affected by it. Now, that sort of behavior in a so-called professional services organization is a snapshot of the culture and the values that dominate so much of the way that businesses actually conduct themselves. Not what they say, but what they do.
Yeah. I need to move on to the other parts of what you really highlight strongly in the book. And I know it's a real big passion of what you now do as well within mental health, which is education, innovation, and productivity. So, going back to Smith and what you've written in the book is that he saw education as the absolute engine room of equality, but not just equality, but economic output. It was an economic tool, in his words, in terms of where it is. You're quite disillusioned at the moment with education. Take me through what you see is happening in education, what needs to change, and why it is the best tool and predictor for economic
Yeah.
output in the future.
Yeah. I'm disappointed by education because I'm passionate about education. As someone
Mhm.
who has studied for 6 master's degrees, I
Somebody that loves education, not just likes it, loves it.
love it. And the power of education, I believe passionately in the power of education. But what I see when I look at the education environment here, and again, we're not unique, is a system that is full of challenges, that is failing to deliver on the expectations that the society should have of it. I start by looking at the distinction between private and public education. I get very upset about that. I think that the privileges that go with private education relative to the disadvantages that we see in the public education just seems to me to be just totally unfair on the impact that this can have on your life as a youngster. If you're born on the wrong side of the track, so to speak, or in the wrong postal code, and you can't afford access to the private education system, then in many ways your future has been defined for you, and you become a prisoner of that environment because of the importance of early stage development, to unlocking the potential that's within you, but also it ties into mental health. So I feel that education is arguably, together with health, arguably of the two most important things government should take responsibility for. And what's happened in our education system, as I say, is a great divide between public and private. I don't like that. A big divide. The quality of education in the system, we see this in the NAPLAN results, is mixed. We've such a high percentage of 15-year-olds that are failing basic education standards. Again, big gap between private and public here. We have a university. We've had a proliferation of tertiary degrees, which prima facie would be seen as a good thing, but the quality of some of those degrees have been, questioned by many experts. And also, we're not necessarily developing and training and educating people in the skills that are important to the future of the country. And I emphasize important to the future of the country, because given the environment that we and other nations sit in of unprecedented, and I don't say that lightly, but
Hmm.
unprecedented change that is taking place. I talked about technology, climate change, the geopolitical world that we're living in is dramatically changing in front of us, and what does it mean? And there's a whole list of other big changes that mean that the world that we live in for the next 50 years plus is going to be dramatically different from the world that we have been living in for the last 50 years plus. And so, what are we doing at a strategic level to make sure that our people are educated to help make sure that we as a nation realize the potential of the change and not caught like the proverbial boiled frog by not adapting quickly enough to the changes? So that's a long-winded answer to a question that is a critical question, that education is so fundamentally important to the country. It's so
Hmm.
fundamentally important to the individual. It breaks my heart when I see young people having a poor education experience because they were born in a household or in an area that just didn't have the resources to provide a better education. And then people that are lucky enough, to have been born in a different environment where the price of a quality education is not as such a big issue. Although I do know that there are lots of families that make big sacrifices to put children through a good education, but those are not options open to lots of people. And there's something, it just seems something grossly unfair that a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old in a poor area should have his or her life marked out for them because the education experience is inferior to their friend, perhaps, who lives across the next neighborhood, but in a more affluent environment. So that for me is big issue number one. Big issue number two is making sure that our education institutions are set up for educating for the skills that we need
Hmm.
in the future.
Yep.
And there's greater rigor around the education and training of students, so that they are learning something. I mean, the idea of spending 3 or 4 years at a tertiary institute, getting a degree certificate, but 6 months later saying, actually, I'm not really learning very much. I got past the exams and I've used
But
some.
what have I got?
What have I got?
Is that also getting back to what we discussed at the start of this interview, which is that universities are also now bordering into the world of profit rather than non for profit, and they have started to develop programs and education systems that is more about quantity rather than quality, and therefore we now can't apply vigor. We can't basically, say or push students to actually accept that they are right or wrong. Have we also therefore developed that same nature in an institution that realistically should be challenging, and using your word, putting rigor into education, because universities have now become, inverted commas, a business rather than an education output?
A production line, a
Yeah.
factory, degree factory, to use a term that's.
Because is it degrading the value of that
Well,
degree as well?
I do. I look at that. We have some of the best universities in the world. I mean, let's, in giving ourselves a hard time, let's step back and recognize that people come to this country and
For a
pay,
good reason.
yeah, for a good reason. And whenever I was in London at one of the established universities there last month, receiving an alumni award, and I met speaking to the vice chancellor and senior members of the faculty there. They all talked in glowing terms about our some of our universities. So our universities have a wonderful reputation. Some of them a wonderful reputation internationally. That is fantastic, and that's something that we should protect and nurture, and never allow to fall into a state of disrepair. But it's also true to say that some institutions, and I would say quite a lot of institutions, have dropped the standards Part of it's driven by needs, but driven by the economics of collecting fees from overseas students in order to fund the university, and that comes at a cost. When you've built institutions over centuries that to reputations that that some of them have got today, you must never lose sight of the fact that a reputation arrives on the back of a tortoise and leaves on the back of a galloping horse and is very hard to recover.
Hmm.
We should protect, as national assets, some of the great universities that we have, the reputation of those universities, and realize that sometimes that standards may have been allowed to uh, fall because of economic necessities, and we should be addressing that issue.
I'd be remiss not to sort of go back to the big question you put in your book, which is, what would Adam Smith make of modern Australia? So I'll ask the question: if Adam Smith walked into the Australian economy today, what do you think he would make and be most encouraged by? But what would he be most dismayed by as well?
He would be encouraged about how this country has developed over the last decades and years, how it has built a powerful export market, and how it has played to what the economists call the comparative advantage of nations. That we have strengths in resources and in agriculture and wine, and other aspects of agriculture that we export to the world, and that we have been a good corporate citizen of the world in that regard. So I think he would see that would be an B plus to A on that scorecard.
Hmm.
He would look at the way in which over the last 20 to 30 years that we have allowed uh, important measures of societal well-being to fall into a state of disrepair. We've almost forgotten the importance of making sure that the economy is there to serve the needs of a vibrant society, not the other way around. And that we've neglected that, and that our public policies, our government policies, have been missing in action. And that would so when it comes to the health of society, that would be a D at best, frankly. And then when it comes to the market system, where he was a strong believer in the power of markets and the power of competition, uh, the invisible hand, which is often associated with Adam Smith, he would see industry sectors that are heavily concentrated. He would see businesses behaving unethically or morally in the way that they are seeking to maximize economic rents or profits at the expense of customers, and that they lobby government extensively to protect privileges. We saw that. I won't go through examples, but you and anybody listening can think of numerous examples. And he would say that this is not the capitalism that I believe Australia deserves. This is a corruption of the capitalism that we should have, and things need to be done because you can't have a healthy, vibrant market economy that so many people feel disconnected from or are not sharing in the benefits of, and that a very small handful are sharing a disproportionate amount of the economic pie. And then some there's an attitude in some cases of a condescending attitude of trickle down economics. Australians deserve a lot better than that, and so we've got a system that has got us to where we are today, but it's a system that's not set up for the future, and so things need to be done before it's too late. And hence the ball frog analogy that I've mentioned a couple of times. The biggest risk to our future is the inaction in addressing the issues that the book highlights, but issues that have been commented on and discussed by others before this book was published.
That leads me then beautifully to my last question that I ask all of my guests, Joesph Healy. Joesph Healy, if you were in charge for just one day, what would you do?
I would commit Australia to a vision of world-class education and health system. So important. I can't think of anything, anything as important to a healthy society than a world-class education. And I would get rid of this private-public split. I'd say that every Australian, regardless of the economic circumstances in which they were born into, deserves access to a world-class education system. And then because our future will depend on that. And then on the health system, every Australian deserves access to the best possible health system. I would say that as part of that, what would I do in one day? I would invest heavily between the government and the business sector in research and development, both in education and in health, through the use of the exciting potential of technology. And if we do that with a vision, because we've not had a vision in this country from the top for, well, I can't remember the last time we we need a vision in such a turbulent world. And so education and health.
Joesph Healy, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on Exchanges. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much, Evan.
Big thank you to Joesph. What a discussion. What a thinker in terms of what he does. I'm so privileged to have got to sit here and listen to that and be part of it. It was just amazing to listen, to understand about what he sees as positives and obviously what he sees as negatives in modern Australia and how we can fix it. Because that's the other part of this. He does argue about ways to fix it. And it was just fantastic to bring it to you. And I really did hope you loved it as much as I did, because that was just something I absolutely adore talking about, and it was a privilege to do it. So thank you. To you out there watching, listening, or wherever it is you're getting this podcast, please remember, if you can, subscribe on whatever button you need to click on. Also, if you wouldn't mind, give us a rating, because the more ratings we get, the more the community grows, and so on and so forth. If you've also got any ideas, concepts, or people you want me to interview, don't forget, there is an email. It's exchanges@evanlucas.com.au to go further. But once again, thank you so much for listening, watching, and doing and being part of the Exchanges community. We absolutely adore you being here. So thank you again, and we'll talk to you next week.